I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 110 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veteran Affairs. Conformément à l'article 108.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on March 9th, 2023 and December 5th, 2023, the committee is resuming its study on recognizing Persian Gulf War and wartime service veterans. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and I would like to remind everyone that all questions and comments must go through the chair.
For the first hour, I have the honor to introduce the Honorable Jeanette Pettit-Taylor, Minister of Veterans Affairs, qui est accompagnée des...
Who has with her representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs, Mr. Paul Ledwell,
and Mr. Mitch Freeman, Director General Policy and Research. Donc alors, bienvenue à vous trois.
Welcome to the three of you. Madam Minister, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. And after that, members of the committee will be pleased to ask you their questions. You have the floor, Madam Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I promise that I will speak slowly. One moment.
You have a problem with translation, or?
I beg your pardon, Mr. Chair. It might be just mine, but I could not hear any translation at all.
Non, donc si je parle en français maintenant.
So if I'm speaking French, are you hearing the interpreter right now? Still not hearing the interpreter?
No. Yes. Try.
Continue, it's just me.
Yeah, it's just you. Okay, but you're important also. Well, okay, so sorry, Minister, so please start again.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Encore une fois, je tiens à promettre que je vais tenter de parler
I want to repeat that I will try to speak slowly for the interpreters.
to appear before committee today. To begin, let me first say that our government is grateful for the dedicated service of all Canadian members of the Canadian Armed Forces and veterans, including those who served in the Persian Gulf from 1990 to 1991. More than 4,000 Canadians were part of the international coalition of nations that fought to return freedom to the people of Kuwait. Plus de 30 ans plus tard, nous reconnaissons que de cette...
More than 30 years later, we recognize that serving under such stressful conditions has taken a heavy toll on many service members. On the subject of recognition, Mr. Chair, we understand that some Persian Gulf veterans are questioning how their service in this conflict is designated.
Under the current legislative framework and the designation practices within the CAF, the Persian Gulf is designated as the highest level of risk, a special duty area. Throughout the years, veterans shared that the programs delivered under the Pension Act were no longer meeting the needs of modern-day CAF veterans and that of their family. Changing demographics, coupled with the need to respond to the changing needs of modern-day veterans, prompted a replacement of the Pension Act in 2006, which was supported by all parties in the House of Commons at the time. The new Veterans Charter, later called the Veterans Wellbeing Act, provides comprehensive rehabilitation, medical, psychosocial, and vocational support, financial benefits, disability benefits, career transition services, access to public health care plan, and one-on-one case management for the most complex cases. While the Pension Act addressed the needs of veterans through a single method of support, the disability pension, the Veterans Wellbeing Act was designed to provide a more varied suite of benefits in order to meet veterans where they were in terms of post-service needs. Whereas most First and Second World War veterans were leaving the military in similar stages of life and therefore had similar needs, modern-day era veterans can make this transition at any stage, whether early on in their career or again later in life. Though the Veterans Wellbeing Act, the government announced its Pension for Life plan, which reintroduced lifelong monthly payments with the pain and suffering compensation, it established a new recognition benefit, the additional pain and suffering compensation, and introduced the income replacement benefit to simplify VAC's financial support programs by streamlining 6 different financial benefits into one, that being the new income replacement benefit. We brought in better supports for the family of ill and injured veterans, including their caregivers, by eliminating time limits on vocational rehabilitation for veterans, survivors, and spouses, expanding access to the Military Family Resource Centre, and introducing the caregiver recognition benefit. Pour répondre à la demande.
To meet the growing needs of veterans, our government has invested $11 billion in benefits and services. We've also made changes to improve mental health care by introducing automatic approval of mental health claims so that veterans can get the help they need when they need it.
Dont ils ont besoin et quand ils ont besoin. Modern veterans, including those who served in the Persian Gulf, have sacrificed for our country. We owe them a debt of gratitude that can never fully be repaid. Je vous assure que je prends au sérieux ma responsabilité.
I assure you that I take my responsibility as their minister seriously. And as a government, we are committed to ensuring that veterans receive the support they need during their transition and after their service. This commitment also extends to the commemorative aspect of recognition, which can influence the way veterans see themselves and feel appreciated by their fellow citizens.
Priority to ensure that veterans, no matter where and when they served, whether it was in the Persian Gulf, serving on humanitarian missions, supporting Canadians impacted by the forest fires in Jasper, or through search and rescue operations, are recognized for their service. À l'approche de la Semaine des vétérans, je tiens.
As Veterans Week approaches, I want all veterans and their families to know that we are thinking of them and that we appreciate and recognize the many sacrifices they have made in the service of Canada.
Lastly, to those veterans who are here, who have shared their stories as well during this study, I want to say a sincere thank you. And to all those that are listening today, thank you for your service to Canada. We truly remain a grateful nation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, Monsieur le Président, we are prepared to take some questions from committee members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. Exactly 5 minutes. So now let's go to the first round of questions. And I invite the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Blake Richards, for 6 minutes, please.
Sure. Minister, I first had the chance to ask you in this committee about this particular question about a year ago. And then, as today in your opening remarks, you expressed your appreciation for service, and including the service in the Persian Gulf. But just like then, today you were again not clear on the question that's really at the heart of this matter, which is that the Persian Gulf War was a war. So I'd like to ask you the same question I asked you a year ago. Do you believe the Persian Gulf War was, in fact, a war?
First of all, thank you so much, Mr. Richards, for that question. I'm always pleased to appearing before the ACVA committee. And I do remember very well last year that you had asked me that question, that specific question. I would say that first and foremost, I want to thank all the members, the more than 4,000 men and women who served in the Persian Gulf War. And I say war. I think that we have to recognize that the men and women who served in Persian Gulf were in harm's way, number one. And also they were outside of the safety of Canada. So with that, and I think we also have to add that they signed up for this mission. So do I consider this a war? I would consider it a war. With respect to the legislation, however, my definition as to what I quantify as a war does not necessarily mean that the legal definition in the legislation does the same.
Fine. Having said that, then does that then mean there needs to be a change in the legislation? Would you support a change in the legislation to designate these heroes as having served in wartime service?
I think, once again, we have to take a few steps back and looking that the Government of Canada and all different governments of the day have certainly looked at reviewing these different types of benefits. I think first and foremost, if we look back, if we take a long step back in the early 1900s, when we first and foremost put the Pension Act that was in place, or the pensions of the day that were in place, they were there to meet the needs of the First World War and the Second World War. And as I said in my opening remarks, I think the realities back then and the needs of veterans back then are very different than the needs of today.
Okay, so, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you because obviously the time is limited. I think we're well aware of the circumstances around different, you mentioned them in your opening, we've heard them at this committee, but the question really comes down to this. Would you support a change that would enable these veterans to get the recognition they deserve, which is that they served as wartime service? That's a yes or no, really. So,
Mr. Richards, I welcome this study that the committee members are doing,
But
and I
do you
welcome
support-
I welcome the recommendations that are going to be brought forward. And I think again, it's truly important to make sure that we listen to our stakeholders, that we listen to those men and women who served in the Persian Gulf. And again, I truly look forward to receiving the recommendations from this committee.
okay, so I'll just note that we didn't get a clear response to that question. So let me ask you this: the last time you were here, you made the contention that it wasn't within your role to be able to make this change. It was within the Minister of National Defence's role. Is that still your contention?
The decision for this type of change to be made is in the purview of the Minister of National Defense in consultation with the Associate Minister of Veterans, the Minister of Veterans Affairs and the Associate Minister of National Defense.
Okay, well, I appreciate that we at least received a clear response there. Let me move to another topic that's very pertinent with Remembrance Day coming up. In France, for the official commemorations by the Government of Canada for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, there were no prayers said by the military chaplains present. Now, at other ceremonies that were held by our allies or by other organizations, there were, in fact, prayers said. Can you tell me why that's the case? Why was there no prayers said by the military chaplains at these ceremonies put on by the Government of Canada?
Well, I would say, Mr. Richards, that I attended many of those ceremonies with you while we were in France, and prayers are moments of reflection. I really don't necessarily remember the exact words that the chaplains have said, but in no way were any chaplains within the Canadian Armed Forces told that they were not allowed or permitted to say words of prayers. If they chose to make statements of reflection or prayers, either or are absolutely appropriate and available.
So then, Minister, it's your contention that there was no directive that they from your department that they could not. In fact, like I know there is a directive that is in existence, of course, put out by the Chaplain General of the Canadian Armed Forces that indicates prayers are not to be read by the chaplains at those types of ceremonies. Is it your contention that Veterans Affairs is not bound by that directive and did not make any direction to the chaplains that they couldn't pray, that the chaplains themselves chose not to? Is that your contention?
Mr. Richards, just like you and many members of this committee, we attend many Remembrance Day events across the country, and prayers are oftentimes a part of those services. With respect to the prayers and the moments of reflection that happened...
My apologies for interruption, but we're talking about these services specifically. They were put on by your department, I believe, were they not?
I can tell you clearly, Mr. Richards, that we did not give any direction to the Chaplain General indicating that they were not allowed to give prayers. That is absolutely clear. It did not come from our department.
Okay. So the chaplains that were there made the choice on their own to not pray at those ceremonies. Is that what you're saying? Moments
of reflection as well, Mr. Richards, are prayers.
Okay. Well, we'll have to agree to disagree on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. And now let's go to MP Wilson Miao for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for appearing at our committee again and again, and it's always great to see you here with your officials. As you know, we are undergoing this important study about the definition between wartime service and special duty service. And in the room here, we also have our Gulf veterans sitting. And your remark did mention that, you recognize this Gulf War as a war. How can we make sure that the compensation perspective is matching to what was done in the past on the Pension Act compared to the new Wellbeing Act?
Well, thank you so much for that question. And again, thank you for the work that this committee is doing for this very, very important study. Going to finish off my answer, I guess, that I started with Mr. Richards with respect to times have changed when it comes to providing benefits and supports to our veterans. And again, as I indicated, the needs of veterans perhaps in the First World War and the Second World War are very different than our modern-day veterans today. And one of the reasons why that a review of the pensions has been done back in 2006 and again in 2017 was specifically that, to ensure that we could meet the needs of the veterans that have served our country in different missions. If we look back in 2006, what had been brought forward had been agreed upon by all parliamentarians in the House of Commons. In 2017, again, the minister at the time was Minister Seamus O'Regan. And again, we reviewed the benefits that were available to veterans. At the time as well, we wanted to ensure that not only were financial benefits going to be provided to our veterans, but we also wanted to have a holistic approach in making sure that we could provide our veterans with services that they needed. And as a result came the new pension under the wellness, the Veterans Wellness Being Act, sorry. And as a result of that as well, I certainly want to recognize that we really wanted to focus on the 7, when we talk about well-being for veterans, we really want to make sure that we are really considering all levels of well-being, and that's not just financial well-being. When I spoke to case managers in the past, they indicated to me that in previous years before the new version of the pension was brought forward, that they could not offer any services to our veterans at all. So if people wanted to go back to work, let's say, and they needed to address some barriers, and if they needed vocational services or vocational counseling, none of that was available. So as a result, with this new version, we are able to not only provide them with financial compensation in pensions, but also in making sure that the 7 domains of wellness are being addressed as well. So with that, it provides a package to make sure that not only are we addressing the needs of veterans of today, but also if they want to re-enter the workforce, that they will have access to some of those benefits as well. Today's reality for veterans is very different than that of many years ago. The average age of exiting veterans right now, or members of the Canadian Armed Forces, are approximately the age of 37 years old. So many of them have many more careers ahead of them. So we want to make sure that not only we can equip them for the challenges of today, but also make sure that they're equipped, for opportunities in the future.
Thank you, Minister, for your response. And we also heard from witnesses in this committee recently who said that Veterans Affairs Canada is not active in research and that it does not have a department devoted to doing research. Based on what I've been hearing, that's not my understanding, but could you provide more insight from your perspective as a minister towards this?
Sure. So I can confirm that the Department of Veterans Affairs Canada does have a research directorate. We've been involved in doing research over the past number of decades when it comes to issues that are pertaining to the well-being of veterans. We also, since we formed government, put in place 2 centers of excellence as well, and we do research in collaboration with them. So many of you are very familiar with the Atlas Center. They are a center of excellence that do research, applied research in the area of PTSD, PTSI, and also mental health. The other center of excellence as well that we've put in place is the chronic pain. And again, this center of excellence continues to do really important work in that area. And again, we continue to look and to review the research that is being done internationally as well. And finally, Canada is also a member of the Five Eyes Research Group. And actually, Canada is a chair of that group as well. So we certainly recognize there's always much more work that needs to be done in the area of research. But as a government, as a department, we are committed to ensuring that that work is done. Recently as well, you tabled a report when it comes to women's veterans, and we certainly recognize that longitudinal studies when it comes to, women's veterans and women's health is very much important. So these are the issues that, again, we continue to take very seriously, and I'm pleased to see that the government, that our department continues to do the work in that area.
Thank you, Minister. And we also heard from Rear Admiral Summers and Vice Admiral Miller at a recent meeting that they shared some powerful testimony on how they received bags of letters from all across Canada from students who wanted them to know that their service was important and that Canadians were in their corner even if they were half away across the world. And Vice Admiral Miller recalled they respond to every letter And with all that in mind, how can we help young people to develop a better appreciation of the service and sacrifice made by the armed forces, veterans, and in particular, the Persian Gulf veterans?
Saying thank you to these brave Canadian men and women is truly important. And through the Department of Veterans Affairs and through the tools that we have, we certainly want to make sure that we can make it more easy for teachers, for professionals, and I see that my colleague has. So through the Veterans Affairs website, there are many tools that are available to ensure that commemoration is encouraged for young people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miao. As you know, you should address all of your questions through the chair, but I'm flexible on that. But don't forget that we have interpretation, so try to be de respecter le temps. Et maintenant.
And now, I will invite the second vice chair of the committee, Mr. Luc Desilets, to speak for the next 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, colleagues. Thank you very much to our witnesses for being with us, Madam Minister, Mr. Lidwell, and Mr. Freeman. What you said earlier is that veterans deployed to the Gulf, and the word war is always problematic, but veterans deployed to the Gulf were in a war zone. They were in harm's way. So in harm's way and not at war. For me, the definition of our troops sent to that area, well, they call it a war. For me, it is a war. That is what the people who were deployed said, or call it. Even if I consider it to be a war, the definition in the legislation is not the same. Does that cause any issues to have a definition of the word war that they feel like they were at war, but we can't include that in our legislation? I think that we need to recognize that the modernization of legislation was done to meet the needs of people who served during that war. And we also look at Afghanistan, not only this mission, but other missions as well. I want to be sure that veterans that were injured have access to the services that they need when they need them, whether it be for compensation or rehabilitation services, vocational services. We want to have different services available to help them and move to the next step. These service members were at war, but not Canada, correct? Yes. Does that seem logical? Do you agree with that? Well, the war was not here in Canada, but we did deploy Canadian armed forces to that fight. And we participated in 3 other wars that did not happen here. Mr. Desilets, I'm eager to hear the recommendations from this committee. My priority as Minister for Veterans Affairs is to ensure that we correctly serve our service members when they need it and how they need it. Madam Minister, there are risks. This was not a small conflict. Risks were high, sacrifices were made, and they were not recognized. After April, they were not properly recognized after 2006. I'm not sure if I understood your question, Mr. Desilets. Some left a part of themselves there. It's a war, but it's not being recognized as one. Do you agree with that statement? When we're talking about compensation after the war, there are people who participated in that mission, and they have my respect and the respect of committee members, and we want to be sure that these service members have access to the services that they need. How can you explain how the word war is not on the commemorative monument in Ottawa, whereas we find the war in Africa from the 1890s. Canadians during your consultations and during your hearings here at committee, you've heard that there is no consensus regarding what should be inscribed on these monuments. I'm very eager to receive the recommendations from the committee. And it'll be important to hear from Canadians regarding what they would like to see on that monument, a monument that is important to Canadians. You stated that Veterans Affairs, that the hands were tied for Veterans Affairs and that it is rather in the purview of the Department of Defense. Yes, that is what I said, but I also want to clarify they need to consult with me. Would you be ready to table a bill that would give Veterans Affairs the ability to act? I am eager to hear the recommendations from the committee, and I will read the report and provide the government's response to the study. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
To Ms. Blaney for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. And as always, everything that I say goes through the Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the Minister and her folks for being here with us today to talk about this really important issue. The first question that I have is around harmonizing benefits. We have heard from multiple Gulf War veterans that their concerns are legitimately about getting what they deserve and need, and they really want that acknowledgement. We know that, for example, Senator Patterson came in to visit us and talked about harmonizing benefits. We know that in 2019, the Ombudsman actually had a recommendation that talked about harmonizing benefits. And this is something that veterans have brought up to me repeatedly, is this fear and concern about one set of veterans getting one type of benefit and others getting a different one. So I recognize that it was a vote that was done in the House that everybody supported, but I do believe that we've heard enough that harmonizing benefits should be part of the discussion, and I'm wondering, is there any work happening in the department around that?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for the question, Ms. Blaney, and I also wanted to take a moment to congratulate you on your new appointment as PSPC critic. I was happy to see that you're not leaving AVAC because we've done some good work. You've done some really good work, and the women would be very disappointed if you were brought on to another committee. So thank you and congratulations on that, and I look forward to being at your event this evening as well. So just to say that. The harmonization of both acts, I know that this committee has heard this from some witnesses that have come forward, and that being one of them being Senator Patterson. I think both acts are vital in our efforts to support veterans, and both acts are significant. And again, I don't want to review the history behind it all, but I can tell you that when I speak to Veterans Affairs case managers or agents that work with veterans, they tell me that the newest revision of this act has provided them and has provided actually veterans with that many more tools to be able to move on to the next phase of their life. When we talk about the 7 domains of wellness for our veterans, those were areas that were not even addressed with the past pensions that we had. So for us wanting to make sure that veterans are able to gain effective control of their life, being able to move on, that is why that the revision, if you will, of the Veterans Wellbeing Act was done. Because we, again, want to make sure that veterans qualify for the financial, the compensation benefits, but also because so many veterans are exiting the Canadian Armed Forces at a much younger age, we want to make sure that we're setting them up, for success and addressing the barriers that they may face. Things like providing them with mental health counseling and supports, making sure that they have access to vocational training. And I know that you're all familiar with the programs that Veterans Affairs offers, but that is really vital, and we want to make sure that they have access to that.
I only have a few more minutes. So one of the things that I found really startling was a lot of the testimony that we heard about a lack of awareness or acceptance within Veterans Affairs around the Gulf War syndrome. In fact, just a few days ago, we had Mr. Bure and Ms. Richards here with many stacks of their applications, their appeals, and the paperwork was quite daunting. So, my concern is that veterans that served us during that time are having to prove the Gulf War syndrome repeatedly and having to go through an appeal process which delays and delays and delays. And of course, like any community that served together, we see this again and again in veterans as they talk to one another. So it defeats not only the people facing the challenge, but it defeats the people who served before they even put their foot in the front door. So I'm just wondering, is there any work that's actually being done to address this issue so that when people come forward with these types of serious health issues that are very well documented and researched in other countries, but maybe not so much in Canada, to stop that? So, it goes back to what I've spoken about before, which is we really need trauma-informed services. People who have gone through serious trauma while they're serving this country need people on the other end of the phone that understand that trauma can impact people in a very particular way, and having to prove and reprove your illness again and again, and having to feel that you're fighting for your basic rights is not what we want to see. So I'm just wondering, is there any work that is actually happening around acknowledging these illnesses and making the duty less burdensome on the veterans who serve us?
So 3 points that I'll make very quickly, and I know that we're short for time here. But
minute and a half,
first and foremost, trauma-informed training for our staff, that was a recommendation that was made in the last study that you've done, and I am absolutely committed to making sure that our staff at Veterans Affairs Canada receives trauma-informed training, specifically when working, with our veteran population. Number two, when it comes to the issue of the Gulf War syndrome, any veteran who has been injured as a result of a service-related matter, we want them, and if anyone that is listening to us today, I want to tell them to contact Veterans Affairs Canada, because if there is a need, we want to be there to help them. I am told, and that was just recently through the department, that when a veteran comes forward with a Gulf War syndrome issue, if you will, if that their claim has been denied, that claim is going to be sent to a health professional within Veterans Affairs Canada, because we want that file to be reviewed, and perhaps one of my colleagues can elaborate a bit on that afterwards, because we want to make sure that the file is going to be reviewed in its totality, making sure that we haven't missed anything. And finally, you talked about the delay. That, however, will create a delay in the processing of the file, because we are, putting another step in that. And that process is done automatic when it comes to individuals, that are coming forward with those types of issues or illnesses. So I don't know if Paul or Mitch want to elaborate.
I'm sorry, we will come back because already the time is up. So we will come back in the next round. We're going to have we have this round of 25 minutes, so we'll be able to ask you maybe more questions. And I invite Mr. Fraser-Tolmie for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us tonight, or today, pardon me. Minister, in your opening statement, and I may have heard you wrong, you referred to the Gulf War as a humanitarian effort, and I know that a portion of that, it was a humanitarian effort, and we've heard of how our forces were in harm's way. And when questioned by my colleague, Mr. Richards here, you yourself said that you personally felt that Canadians who served in the Gulf War, it was a war, in your own personal definition. And I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. But you said legal legislation has a different definition from what you consider what is a war. Could you tell me what legal legislation you're referring to?
Again, with respect to, I did not bring the copy of the legislation in front of me, but I am more than happy to be able to table it at my earliest convenience for you.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. because I think that this legal legislation is important. But you also mentioned that it was under the Minister of National Defence's purview, and you yourself as the associate. So I kind of feel like we're halfway there. What is stopping you from calling the Minister of National Defense and saying, let's settle this, let's call this a war, and let's get this dealt with?
And that is why that this committee is undertaking this very important study at the moment. I have met with several veterans from the Gulf War over the past 14 months, and they wanted this study to be undertaken. And I, again, want to thank all of the committee members for doing this important study, listening to the veterans, listening to the stakeholders on the matter, and I truly look forward to receiving the recommendations from the committee.
Thank you, and thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, well, I feel that you already agree. I mean, I think we do important work in this committee. So we've already got the same answer. So I think that we're already there. If we say that we call it a war, are you going to say to the minister, yes, let's call it a war?
Again, I'm truly looking forward to the work and the recommendations of this committee, and I'm going to do my due diligence and review all of the recommendations, and looking forward to responding to the committee reports by a government response.
Thank you. Fighting with the mic. So we didn't get a yes or no on that, and which is disappointing, because I really appreciated your personal opinion that it's a war. I feel that you have influence on this department, and I think that you have influence on making this change, and I really hope that the efforts that this committee is putting forward, we will see results and a recommendation that is actually acted upon. So I'm going to ask you another question then. What legislation had to be changed in order to allow for the Korean vets to be recognized for their wartime service? Is it the same legislation that you're going to be forwarding to us?
I'm going to let one of my officials perhaps answer that question. But again, I guess even before that I turn it to them, let's be frank, whatever legislation that transpires, will be done by Parliament. So we all have a voice in Parliament. We're over 300 voices in Parliament, 338 of us that are there, and we will be able, to debate that in the House. And if that is the case and such the wishes of the committee, and if that is the case and the steps moving forward.
Through you, Chair, just thank you, Minister. But nothing comes forward unless you bring it forward. And, we just feel like we're spinning in circles here. The answer's right here. The opportunity's right here. You agree with us. It just seems to be that all it takes is action. All it takes is one phone call to call the Minister of National Defense and say, let's call this a war, let's get this sorted out, and we can start acting on other things that this committee could be tackling.
Well, again, I don't think that anyone is going in circles. I think this study has been very important, very informative to be able to understand the intricacies of benefits, of supports that are offered to veterans. And I would dare say that many members of this committee have learned an awful lot about this important issue.
Yes, but you agree with us. You agree with what the committee's hearing. This is within your purview. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. I have to make sure that everyone has their turn. And now I'd like to invite Miss Lisa Hefner for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just start my timer. And thank you to the Minister and officials also for being here to answer our questions today. MP Blaney brought up the testimony from the Honourable Senator Rebecca Patterson, who was here recently talking about her experiences. And she was also talking about her experiences helping to set up the Women Veterans Council, something that I'm very excited about as PS to the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth. I'm hoping you can give us an update on what's happening with that committee, but also tell us about how that committee can better help us communicate and commemorate the service of modern-day veterans, in particular those that served in the Persian Gulf, because that's what we're studying here today. And perhaps the members of the Conservatives can keep their voices down a little bit, because it's getting distracting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hefner, and thank you so much for that question. Like you and many members of the committee, I'm extremely excited and looking forward to the formation of this committee. Senator Patterson and a few others have worked hard and continue to work hard, and I look forward to being able to do the actual official announcement of the committee members in the very near future. With respect to the work, first of all, to take a step back, with respect to the application process for the committee, we were really quite pleasantly surprised with the number of applicants that came to committee, that put their names forward to be members of the council. And again, we are just really pleased with the number of people that have applied and looking forward to working with this incredible group of individuals that will really be able to provide me with advice and assistance when it comes to working with women veterans, modern day veterans, and so on. And again, looking forward to doing the actual announcement very soon. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Minister. I was incredibly honored to be part of, to join you and the Canadian delegation when we went to France for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. It was an incredible experience. In particular, I know we had a Hamilton veteran, Major General Richard Romer. It was so incredible to have him there and to listen to his reflections while he was back in France. But you must, I mean, you've now been in this role for a year or so. You must have spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of veterans. What's sort of the overlying themes? What are you most hearing from veterans when they come and speak to you one-on-one?
Well, again, thank you so much for that question. And many of us attended the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Yourself and also Mr. Richards was present. And meeting with individuals like General Romer, some of the greatest, the best of the best Canadians, was an absolute honor and privilege for all of us who attended those services. And also, we had many Canadians that were there as well that attended those events. With respect to your question, your specific question, yes, over the past 14 months, if you will, I've had the opportunity of meeting with thousands of veterans from coast to coast to coast. Being an eager minister, I wanted to make sure that I was able to establish those relationships with veterans, to learn from veterans, and also to learn from stakeholders that work with veterans day in and day out. Just this past Friday, I was in Prince Edward Island at the Kingston Legion, branch number 30, I believe. And when I dropped in, there was a coffee meet and greet. The last Friday of every month, they have this event. And I was not the guest speaker. I was just there to really have a chuck and jive, as I like to say, to call it, with our veterans, and just to hear from them. And so their themes that were brought up at that meeting are very similar to the engagements that I have and the feedback that I receive from veterans. They mentioned the issue of service delivery for some individuals. They wanted to speak to me about that. I also heard about my VAC account, that some of the veterans were having difficulties navigating that system. And when I got back to the office in Charlottetown that afternoon, of course, when I hear these issues, directly from veterans, I speak to my staff to find out what exactly, is happening. What are we doing in order to affect change? And they indicated to me that every time that we do an overview or an update of my VAC account, that the department actually has a focus group of 10 or so veterans that actually try the new system out to make sure that it's user-friendly. And I asked them, are we taking perhaps younger veterans that are very savvy when it comes to the internet or, programs, or are we using folks that perhaps are less savvy? And that's exactly, the test cases that they do are with people perhaps that don't, it may not be as easy for them with respect to using computers. So again, we always want to improve the services that we provide to our veterans. And those are just some examples of the issues that have been brought forward. And again, really appreciated meeting with the Kingston Legion branch number 30 and received my first official copy from them that day. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Et maintenant, nous allons passer à Monsieur Luc Des.
We're going to move on now to Mr. Luc Desilets, who has 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, Gulf War veterans, will they officially receive anything during Remembrance Day ceremonies in Ottawa? I imagine you're talking about November 11th. For the ceremonies that will happen here in Ottawa, it's not being organized by Veterans Affairs. It's the Canadian Legion that is responsible for that day's events. At Veterans Affairs, we have been invited by the Legion, and you have no power on that. No, I've been invited to the ceremony, a very emotional ceremony. I participated for the first time last year, and I was there as a guest. Do you agree with me? There will be hundreds of veterans from the Gulf that will be there, and not being identified, that hurts after serving one's country. Mr. Desilets, I would say that for the ceremony on November 11th, there will be thousands of veterans that will be there. Veterans that have participated in numerous conflicts throughout the world. I will thank service members who served in Canada and abroad. There was the commemorative monument for a mission in Afghanistan, and you have often said that the word of veterans is important. You stated that you listened to them and responded to their needs after surveying them. All of the witnesses that we've heard from have stated that they have identical needs. And I imagine that you understand this. Do you intend to listen to Gulf War veterans and respect their needs? I know that my time is almost up, but you have 2 ears and a mouth, and so active listening is one of my qualities, and I will continue to listen to veterans. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Thank you, Madam Minister.
Good to Ms. Blaney for 2 minutes and a half, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. And through you to the Minister, I understand that VAC has just announced that its Women Veteran Forum will be on March 6th and 7th of next year, which is very exciting. I understand that it's been in PEI, Montreal, and Ottawa, and that the location has not been announced. So may I recommend somewhere in the West? So that's just a recommendation, and I'll leave that to you. Madam Minister, I have tabled a motion, motion 132, that is a motion based on the legislation or having legislation that has the duty to inform serving Canadian Armed Forces personnel, release members, and their families, and really in understanding the various benefits and services to which they may be entitled, no matter how extreme their disabilities and loss. You know, I've heard so many veterans, particularly right now from the Gulf War, that talk about the fact that they will be turning 65 really soon. They don't know what retirement is going to look like for them under the programs that they're in. And they're very concerned because of the impacts of the Gulf War syndrome that their capacity to deal with these issues with a worker from VAC is going to be incredibly difficult and painful and traumatizing again. So I really believe in the motion that I put forward that we do need to have a more assertive process of letting veterans and service members know about what are the benefits, what are the resources that they have. And I'm just wondering, is there any work being done at the department around making sure that there's a better system, a more trauma-informed system? Because we've heard from so many veterans that it's not happening well right now.
So thank you again, Ms. Blaney, for that question. And I would say that as a department, we are always looking at ways to better inform veterans of the services and benefits that they are entitled to. And for example, during while members of the Canadian Armed Forces are exiting and and facing retirement, many of them will go through transition interviews at transition centers and so on. And it's really important to make sure that Veterans Affairs staff is included in those transition centers so the sharing of information
Sorry,
can take.
I don't want to interrupt. I just want to clarify. So the veterans I was talking about is veterans that were working age, that were on many benefits because of their service, and now they're about to retire. So it's veteran to a retired age veteran. So I just want to make sure that we're clear. Thank you.
Also, so thank you for that. We also, through the department, want to make sure that we maximize the tools that we have in making sure that veterans, as indicated, are aware of the benefits that they may be entitled to. Through our case managers, but also through our social media campaigns. You'll notice that during the month of November, we really, and not just November, actually, all through the year, we have different social media campaigns in making sure that veterans recognize that they may qualify for services and benefits through Veterans Affairs Canada. So those are the types of tools that we put in place in order to make sure that more veterans are aware of what they're entitled to.
Thank you very much. Now let's go to Mrs. Wagenthal, Kathy Wagenthal, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Can you remind me what was the stipulation of age for modern-day veterans when they were ending their service?
I'm sorry, could you speak a bit louder?
Sure. You were talking about modern-day veterans and the difference, and you were talking about the age that they were at when they returned home, and so had a lot of time left to do other things. What was the age you mentioned?
So with respect to our modern-day veterans that we're seeing right now,
just what was
individuals that are retiring from the Canadian Armed Forces at this present time, the
Yes.
average age is 37 years old.
37, thank you. So what was the average age of wartime veterans when they returned home?
Again, I don't have that number in front of me, but I can ask my staff if perhaps they would be aware. Mitch or Paul?
If I could, Mr. Chair, I don't believe we have that number. Most of the wartime veterans, certainly in First and Second World War, would have been conscripts. They would have volunteered to serve. Right. They would have all left at the same time, roughly, as well. So they were all releasing soon after each of those
Would you say they were
wars.
Probably a lot younger when they returned home?
It could vary. It could vary.
Okay.
There were some older service women and men as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm just questioning why we had to come up with a different term, and the argument was that they are younger. One of the arguments was that hundreds of thousands of volunteers and conscripts who took part in the First World War, Second World War, and Korean War were proportionally, the changing of it to modern-day veterans is that we were dealing with proportionally much smaller numbers of military personnel now who made their careers in the CAF in the decades that followed. I don't understand why, if there was a smaller number of military personnel proportionally compared to those who served in those initial wars, why we felt we needed to make a change to their funding. So am I hearing you right in you saying that you, as Minister of Veterans Affairs, could not determine this for the Gulf War veterans, the term, we couldn't change it to wartime service? Veterans Minister couldn't make that designation, could they?
No, she cannot, not by herself.
And
if I may, Ms. Wagenthal.
No, I want to make the comparison, because the truth of the matter is the Department of National Defense also, from hearing the witness from those that came to this committee, also cannot designate an operation as a wartime service. So I think we're kind of pulling the leg of people here, because neither of you can do it. National Defense can't do it. Neither can Veterans Affairs. And what is the reason for that? Do you know?
Once again, Ms. Wagenthal, when you mentioned about the needs of veterans being different for First and Second World War veterans and today.
Why can you not make that change? It's because it's legislated.
That's exactly what I said earlier.
That's exactly the truth of the matter. So it doesn't matter what this committee comes up with.
Well, I think if the committee comes up with a recommendation with respect to legislative changes, those are the types of things that we're going to...
But you already know those things, is what I'm saying. This isn't giving you news.
tour.
I'm choosing to respond
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
midst
yeah,
of the
but I know, but-
circumstances. I understand that. But the point being that you know, as minister, and the Minister of Defense knows already that this requires a legislative change, correct?
I have made that very clear today,
Okay,
Ms. Wagenthal.
Thank you. I don't believe that it's coming through as clearly as it should, because the reality is that we have people here who were impacted by a significant change. And I'm not arguing that there isn't a more varied suite of services, because I believe that there is, and that they, but I keep hearing that they may be entitled to. Maybe. And I think what has frustrated a lot of our veterans is that they're told over and over again that these circumstances are better, but yet the fight to get them is extensive and the backlogs are extensive. There isn't a sense that they are better off. Perhaps they should, but when you talk about a far smaller portion of military personnel compared to back then, and yet those who served back then have not had the issues that our modern day veterans have had with the system that is in front of them, I would say that there is a great deal of angst there that has been brought on by a change that they didn't have any influence in. They simply were faced with it. Can you tell me, for the Korean veterans, what was their designation when they went?
Mrs. Wagenthal.
I would like an answer to that
Time is
question.
expired, so
I would like an answer to that question.
it's up to the minister to. She
What
can
was their-
send a response to the committee,
That would
to
be
the
good.
clerk, and we will
So my
distribute
question
it
is,
to all
what was their
members.
designation
Mrs.
when they went
Wagenthal,
for?
thank you very
I'm just
much.
asking to clarify.
Thank you. No time. You have 5 minutes. Like I said last meeting, have
I'm glad
your
they're responding.
chronometer with you because each member has questions, so we have to respect the time allowed. So now 5 minutes, Mr. Sean Casey, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Madam Minister and Mr. Freeman, Mr. Ledwell. Let me say first, Madam Minister, that I'm quite impressed that you were able to get to the Kingston Legion, because if you got in your car and went to Kingston, you'd find yourself about 7 kilometers away from the Kingston Legion, which is actually located in the municipality of New Haven. So good on you. Madam Minister, Mr. Richards asked you about prayer at the D-Day ceremonies, but he didn't ask you about flags. He's asked some other witnesses about flags, so I'd like you to talk about flags. And just by way of background, on October the 7th, a Veterans Affairs employee was here, and Mr. Richards said, "We've seen a lack of Canadian flags in the color party at official Canadian events for the 80th anniversary of D-Day." Unfortunately, she was not afforded an opportunity to answer that question, so at the next meeting, a question was posed to some veterans that were here testifying on this particular study, and those veterans were asked how they felt, or how a veteran would feel who fought for this country, who was prepared to give your life for this country, to know that during recent D-Day commemorations in France, there were no Canadian flags as part of the ceremony. Now, Minister, I understand you were there. Could you tell us whether there were any Canadian flags as part of the ceremony?
Absolutely, there was Canadian flags at the ceremony, Mr. Casey, and Mr. Richards, who was present with me, and also Ms. Blaney, who was present with me during the week-long events, saw many, many Canadian flags that were displayed. And I have to say, I find it quite disappointing, incredibly disappointing, that someone would lead this committee in error and also state that to veterans. That is just not okay. There's one thing plain...
Excuse me, Minister, point of order?
Yeah. Point of order.
Yeah.
I mean, it was quite clear that the color party of those ceremonies.
No,
had
That is
no
not a
flags.
point
I'm
of order.
sorry.
That is a point of interruption.
Mr. Richards, Mr. Richards, you're coming a
to
discussion. No, no. We have all of that. Ministers, I'm so sorry. The floor is yours.
During the Canadian events that we had that day at Juno Beach, we made sure that actually the department and the Canadian Armed Forces ensured that there was 13 Canadian flags that were flying that went up the flagpole that day. And members of the Canadian Armed Forces actually took those flags and made sure that they wrapped in appropriately. And members of Veterans Affairs Canada ensured that they were placed in beautiful shadow boxes, Mr. Casey, to be presented to each of our elderly veterans at our last ceremony that evening. evening, the last evening of our events. And I remember very clearly, actually, that Mr. Richards came up to me and said, "What a beautiful touch that was," quote unquote, that we were able to prevent each and every veteran with a flag that flew on Juno Beach the day of the Canadian service. I can tell you, every event that we attended, and if the committee allows me, I'll be more than happy to table many pictures of the event that occurred that week to ensure that people can see that we were quite proud in ensuring that our Canadian flag was present. And I'm sure that many members of the committee that were there would be able to testify to that as well.
Thank you, Minister. We would
Just on a point of order. I would be happy to table the pictures that show there was no flags.
That discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Richards. You know, you have your turn to speak. Now it's not yours. Mr. Casey.
Mr. Chair, will the time from Mr. Richards' non-points of order be added back to my time, or does he get them?
No. He doesn't have
Oh.
them. No
Okay.
problem at all.
Okay,
No.
thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
There was some other testimony that I want to draw to your attention from the last meeting on this study, and that came from a couple of veterans that appeared before the committee and indicated that Charlottetown was far away from vets and from politics and the wrong place to be, that it was hidden away on a tiny little island, conveniently far away, that's too far for a vet to know that they're being properly served. It doesn't matter to me whether it's you, Madam Minister, or your deputy. I would ask you to respond to those comments as to whether veterans are at a disservice for having the national headquarters of the Department of Veterans Affairs located outside the National Capital Region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. And I'll be very frank, I am very proud of knowing that our Veterans Affairs headquarters is in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. And on our watch, the offices certainly will not be moved out of Prince Edward Island. I want to thank all of the Veterans Affairs staff that do incredible work day in and day out on the island, but also across the country. We have 69 Veterans Affairs offices across the country from coast to coast to coast that offer quality services to all veterans. I truly do not feel that all national offices have to be centralized in Ottawa. I think that it's very healthy to ensure that we're close to the people, and being in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island has worked very well for the department. And again, on this watch, the office certainly will not be taken out of Prince Edward Island.
Thank you very much. That's why here we're going to stop for the first hour. Et je voudrais donc un mot.
You have a comment? 30 seconds? 10 seconds, Madam Minister.
Speaker, I've been advised that there has been a committee, a staff that's been working with this committee for a number of years, and her name is Monroe Waters. She's been supporting the committee, but she's moving on to brighter pastures, or other pastures, I should say. And they've told me as well that she's been out sick today, so she's meeting us online. But I simply wanted to say thank you to her for all the work that she's done, and chapeau and all the best in her future projects. So thank you.
Merci.
Great, thank you. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you, Madam Minister, Honourable Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, Minister of Veterans Affairs, and I would also like to thank Paul Ledwell, Deputy Minister, and Mitch Freeman, Director General, Policy and Research. On that, colleague, we will suspend before we move to our second hour.
you.